Welcome to Athletes and Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform to help athletes and other alumni network and connect with each other and tap into various resources into career and health and finance. But more importantly, this show is all about athletes transition out of sport, which is a major issue today between financial literacy, mental health, and other areas. And we interview former college and professional athletes, and we talk about their transition out of sport ultimately into successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. So excited today to have Mark Koesterer. How you doing, Mark?
Hello, Rob. Thank you.
You're welcome. So Mark was a college football player, played at Hillsdale College. Is it Hillsdale University now or still college or was it university back then? Okay, Hillsdale College. I grew up in New Jersey. There was a lot of that thing where they were colleges, now they're universities. So he played football there, and ultimately when he transitioned out of sport, he got into the manufacturing space, into different areas in the metals industry, and then ultimately got into sports and entertainment, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And then today he's the founder and CEO of the Players NIL, which is really exciting. Looking forward to talk more about that. There's so much going on in the NIL space, and Mark's an expert on that, and he'll kind of share his thoughts on that. So Mark, I always talk about growing up playing sports. How did that shape you leading up into college?
Yeah, I think it made me who I am today. I was very fortunate. My father was a college athlete and a junior high gym teacher, so sports was always part of our life. There wasn't as much sports on television as there is today, so sports to me was the neighborhood and the playground, and ultimately started at junior high sports and then into high school and college. But I think during that time, although he never said these words, the lesson that I got from my father was, how can you use athletics to better your life? And I think, what he tried to instill upon me was, you have some God-given abilities. I was not a Power 4 Division I athlete, but good enough to play Division II college football. But most importantly, it got me to a great academic institution. And then all the things that happen with athletics, best friends of your life, all the experiences, the ups and the downs and the leadership lessons. And there's no question that sports has been a big part of my life, even though I haven't always worked in sports. But to me, the childhood lessons were, how do you use athletics to better your life?
Yeah, and it's such an important message. And I think a lot of experience, regardless of what sport, when you start playing such a young age. I mean, did you have a dream of being a professional athlete? And if so, what sport?
I was a basketball junkie, to be honest with you, and I tell people this story. This is the early 70s, dating myself. We had like one or two games a weekend on television, college games. And this was the end of the UCLA heyday. John Wooden was the coach. And the best player in these years was Bill Walton. And I wanted to be Bill Walton. And I don't know that I thought about professional, but I definitely wanted to play college basketball, and I definitely wanted to be on television. So it was a big passion of mine was basketball, and was a real driving force in me pursuing an athletic experience.
Yeah, that's great. I joke around and I say, I did want to be a Major League Baseball player, but talent wasn't there. So, and I do podcasts. So let's talk about, the transition out of sport. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's such a major issue. Talk a little bit about education when you were in school. And I know typically the answer, because most of us, like myself too, did sports a long time ago, but was there any kind of education on, what's next when you were done?
I think I went to a school that most of my teammates and friends were business majors. And I was an education major because my parents were educators, and I just thought that was going to be my path. But I got to college and I realized that there are other jobs besides teaching out there, and I became interested and fascinated with business. And so, probably a general studies education. I went to a liberal arts school, made me become a critical thinker. Right. And I really became interested in the answers to really deep and complex questions about life and society and people and relationships and professional success. And, we're young. We think we know everything. We know nothing at 18 to 23. But for sure, I had all the answers and all the problems solved of the world until I got my first job and realized that there was still a lot of problems to be solved.
Yeah, I think there's life aspects that we learn along the way. And I think now it's more pronounced. I think schools are paying more attention to it because it's so important. I mean, you hear worst case scenario of some of these athletes and what they go through and at the end of that transition or start of the transition. And I think it's important to, like we talk about, going into college athletic departments and with resource partners and just developing additional curriculum not only for the current athletes, but for the alumni athletes as well, that, once they're done to, kind of handle that. So I think it's important now to start seeing more and more education with the transition out of sport. And I also think it, like you said, when you're playing at a smaller school, and same thing for me, or you're in a sport, like I was a runner and I got hurt my sophomore year, but I wasn't going to be a Olympian or professional runner. So it wasn't as big of a deal. So I had more of a mindset. Whereas, some of these, you talk about the Power Five schools, the Division I football players that, foresee a future in the NFL. But even if they have that, there's still a lot of it's done over pretty quickly. And you need to formulate those ideas of what's next when you're done. So let's talk about networking, connecting, and it's so important. Talk about the importance of doing it while you're still playing.
No question about it. I'd say it's one of the things that I learned in college and that I was fortunate enough to take advantage of. As a student government leader on campus, fraternity leader, leader on the football team, got the opportunity to meet a lot of people. And I developed a real curiosity about what made people successful. I'd meet somebody, and from all outward signs, to a college kid, he had a great title, owned a company, was an executive, wore nice clothes, drove a nice car, had a nice house, seemed to have a lot of success in his life, and or her life in those days was the beginning of female CEOs. And I started to want to know, how did they get there? What was that all about? And how did they make the decisions that they made? And I started to study people and ask questions. And there was no internet, obviously. There was no email. There was no LinkedIn. There was no networking. But, I definitely took every opportunity I could to connect with people. And then when I was about ready to graduate and realized that I needed to get a job, I had a target list of people I could send letters to. And so they knew who I was. It wasn't a cold letter. It wasn't a cold phone call. And it created a lot of conversations that led to my first job.
Yeah, and I think so. You did it. You did a great job there of doing it, and I think that's a lesson to all athletes. 'Cause I think a lot of people, they don't necessarily do that, and whether it's the intimidation and talk about a lot, like even starting at the high school level, right? I mean, you've got your teammates and their parents, and you just never know where they might be. Like I had one, I was talking to one previous guest, and he CEO of a company, and his son was playing or is playing college lacrosse, and he encouraged his son's friends, hey, if you need an internship, come to me. So it's great that you were plugging into that. And I think more people need to do it. I think, people want to hang out with athletes, so I think it's, put your antennas up, right, to kind of, see what's out there and make those, those connections.
Correct. Yeah, I think today, number one, I think athletes are celebrated at a higher level today than ever before. So it's changed. Yeah. It's become really, if you're an athlete and you walk in a room, you have certain level of status. And the ability to network, right, through digital marketing and emails and LinkedIn and networking has just made it almost impossible not to do that if you put any effort in at all.
Yeah, and again, it gets back to some of the education, right? I mean, just for the schools and just people to encourage, athletes. Like I've talked to agents before, and they'll say, while they're playing, these athletes don't necessarily do it, the networking, and then all of a sudden they're done playing and they're kind of expecting like, hey, where's my 6-figure job? And, they hadn't built those relationships up over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I call it brand building, right? Just as a corporation tries to create a brand. And I think that's what the NIL era has done for us. And we can talk about that later when we talk about the players' NIL. But the NIL era has awakened people to the fact that athletes are individual brands and require brand building and networking and storytelling to create that brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good, and like you said, we'll talk about it a little more now, but give me maybe some of your thoughts on NIL, both positive and negative.
Yeah, well, I think we've seen the erosion between professional and amateur athletics happening for a long time. I always refer to 1992 when the Dream Team basketball team, Barcelona, was the first professional athletes that the United States had sent to the Olympics. And I think that started a long blurring of the lines between professional and amateur athletics. Forever, the Olympics were participated in by the United States with amateurs. And, then we started to see athletes, become spokespeople, right, in a big way, right? Sponsorship, sports marketing becoming brands. And so on July 1st, 2021, when the NCAA removed all of the restrictions regarding name, image, and likeness monetization, it was just the natural evolution of what we already knew, and that was that athletes were celebrities, right? And whether it was Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, or of course Michael Jordan and Kobe and Shaq, and go through baseball and football the same way. We started to idolize these people. We started to have access to them. And so the evolution of name, image, and likeness was inevitable. The problem is, in my opinion, the NCAA, who had lost every court case that they were involved in, and finally threw their hands up in the air and said, okay, no restrictions, go for it. They didn't do us any favors, Rob, because they gave us no guidance, no guidelines, no principles, no guardrails. And there were no best practices. There were no gold standards. There were no companies that were doing it. So it really became, chaos. The Wild West is what people refer to it as. And so the positive is that athletes now can take advantage of what they've achieved in life. The negative is that, there are people with power and money and influence that have taken advantage of the situation. And the NIL era, which began on that July 1st date, has been dominated by three things. And this is what most people, if you walk down the street and ask them about name, image, and likeness, think of NIL, and that is pay for play, come play for me, I'll give you money. Collective payments, which are the alumni collecting and creating a payment system, and the transfer portal chaos, which has coincidentally happened at the same time as NIL. And once again, the NCAA did us no favors by removing all of those restrictions. And so the NIL era has been dominated by those three things, but has nothing to do with NIL. It has to do with those three things: pay for play, collective payments, and transfer portal. But the NIL era is being blamed for that. So that's my answer.
So let's talk about alumni engagement. Obviously, an alumni director, that's something that's important to us. When you were at school, were they bringing back the athletes to kind of mentor or work with the current athletes?
Yeah, I think it's every school's different, but for me at Hillsdale College, the alumni were a big part of our school. I think you see that a lot in smaller schools that have a lot of alumni pride. I mean, big schools do too, but sometimes the smaller communities have a little chip on their shoulder, and they want to take care of their own, and they may have more campus events, traditional homecoming, parents' weekend, spring games, whatever it may be, that bring people back. And athletics is a big part of that, not just for alumni athletes, but just general alumni population. And I don't think there's any question that it's the biggest opportunity for college athletes is to network with their alumni and to take advantage of, what we assume are like-minded people who care about their institution.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think, the thing I've talked to some other people, and I always bring up myself. We were on a call with my school, and I had one of our Hall of Fame players was on with me, like from the school, and then also he's been played 10 years in the NFL. And just talking to the athletic department about mentoring, and he's kind of like tapped me in, like I want to help. And I think a lot of people want to help. And it's got to be the two-way street. Obviously, the school needs to want it, and then the athletes coming back. And one of the big things that comes up too is that changes in coaches, changes in athletic directors. But still, I think it should be a common thing for people to reach back. I mean, does Hillsdale reach back to you at all today as an alumni?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you know about Hillsdale, but it's a very active alumni base, very active political school. They have created a brand around their resistance to government assistance. It's one of the only schools in the country that doesn't accept government funds for their students and have not since the mid-'70s. So they totally self-fund all the scholarships. And so there's a lot of political activity around that. But we have a lot of pride in our sports. We've had a lot of successful teams over the years. And yeah, I think they do a fantastic job with the alumni networking events around the country, newsletters, on-campus events, invites, a lot of social groups on Facebook and LinkedIn that connect people. And again, there's a lot of pride from a small school standpoint. We're really proud of our efforts there, our accomplishments, and our contributions since. And I think I want to just touch on one thing. One of the challenges, Rob, has been from an alumni participation, especially in athletics, has been compliance, right? People are worried, were worried for years about NCAA violations. What's permissible. The old bagel, you can have a bagel, but you can't have cream cheese story, right? And we understand that there's been a lot of brown bags full of money exchanged in the parking lot in schools forever, right? We know that. And probably we violated some of the NCAA rules when I was in school in terms of they gave us things, and I don't know, we got a school car to go home for Thanksgiving and all kinds of crazy impermissible things, I'm sure. But I think that has been a barrier for alums is, perhaps the administration has put up their hands and said, wait a minute, we don't have any violations. We can't have you taking those kids for a summer internship with no-show jobs and just paying them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You're right. And I guess NIL, has changed that a little bit, but then try scrutiny on that as well. It's, that was the boosters were the old school NIL, right? before it came out. So I always like to ask these questions. I don't know if you got a chance to watch or listen to any other of the episodes. So if you did, you'll be prepared. If not, in 10 words or less, if you can go back in time, what advice would you give to freshman Mark at Hillsdale?
Yeah, I think it's really simple. Look into the future as far as you can and build a roadmap to get there.
All right, he was prepped. He's ready to go. So, and how about senior Mark?
Senior Mark is a little bit of the same, but learn how to take what you've experienced in college and apply it to life.
Oh, I like that. That's good. That's good for sure. So, transition out of sport. Obviously, talk a little bit about your transition. So, you played sports growing up since you're little, and now all of a sudden, your playing days are over. Talk about that, how it impacted you, and where you went from there.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. I just assumed that sports was, and how I lived my life was going to be the way adults live their life. And I quickly learned that although you work for a company, it's not a team, right? Although you work with people, they're not teammates. Although you work with people, they're not your fraternity brothers or your roommates or your housemates. And so I was a little bit lost, quite honestly, and a little bit lonely in that I didn't have this fellowship that I'd had. I didn't have the guidance of being told what time practice was, where we're going to lift weights, what uniforms we're going to wear this weekend. You're almost military-like in that you didn't have to think. You just followed what you were doing. And now, I'm far less connected to the people I'm working with and the company I'm working for. I definitely have good managers, but they're not managing my life. I have to do it myself. And it took me a little while to figure all that out. I think that was the biggest transition.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing, and especially I think the biggest thing you brought up too is just the structure, and I hear that all the time. It's just that the meal tables, everything else. It's just everything's set for you, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well I've got all this time, and how do I do this, and how do I prepare? What words of advice would you give to athletes today as they transition out of sport, whether it's be when they're done playing college ball or whether they're fortunate enough to play professionally?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the plan, looking to the future, right? So make sure that you have an idea of at least a goal of where you want to go and what you want to do, and that you have a plan and find comfort in the execution of the plan and be patient. That's the other thing that I think a lot of us, we're used to success. We played every weekend, right? And, even if we didn't win the game, we had success, right? We made the travel team. We started. We had a good game. We played well. We had fun. Whatever that was, there was a energy and an excitement and the thrill of it. And so you're grasping for that too, right? You become a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, as they say, and that creates impatience. And I think that's a big problem for young people today, especially, and I work with thousands of them, is that, they want to be Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and the Kardashians tomorrow, right? And they don't understand that these things take time, that you have to be patient, that there's going to be setbacks, and you have to, figure out how to, fight through adversity. So patience is the biggest word that I would use.
Yeah, that's good. Every episode I talk about the nuggets, and that's definitely one is patience. Again, if you're used to having success too, and then all of a sudden it's becomes a challenge. It's like, okay, what happened, and that becomes a struggle to people. One thing I always like to talk about too is just, especially your perspective on it. As you were a founder of a company. I mean, you are now too, but I mean, when you were in the sports entertainment business, running a company, talk about a little bit about the athlete skill set DNA and what makes companies want to hire athletes.
Yeah, I think this has been going on forever. It's not, I don't have any secret sauce to it. It's, it's all the things that I just said that I missed, right? It's the discipline, it's the ability to fit in and be a good teammate, the structure, how do you fight through adversity, perhaps overcoming obstacles, determination, all of those things. I don't think there's any big secrets to it. And so, and there's lots of successful people that weren't athletes, but I think
Sure.
as a former athlete, I tried to tap into people with those skill sets. I understood how important it was for someone to be a good teammate, whether they were a former athlete or not. I understood how I needed to understand their life story. Were they, fed with a silver spoon their whole life and never had any challenges? What's going to happen the first time that they don't find success? Or that they have a adversity in the office? Do they turn on their teammates and their coworkers? So I think those principles were part of my life, and I tried to find those principles in the people that I hired and employed.
Yeah, and that's encouraging. I think a lot of athletes, I bring this one up all the time, but I was talking with a college athlete, and he just said that from career services standpoint, not that they don't care, but they didn't necessarily have the bandwidth, and they made a comment like, "Hey, you don't have an internship on your resume." Well, in some cases, they just didn't have the opportunity because busy playing sports or whatever it might be. But I always talk about sports is your resume, and everything you just brought up, and encouraging our viewers and listeners to what Mark said is just that Mark, as a leading a company, look for those skill sets that an athlete offers. So don't feel like when you're done that all of a sudden you don't have anything to offer, because you do have a lot to offer.
Well, I think that's a great point, and I would just add to it, Rob, is that's when building your personal brand becomes so important. So maybe you're on campus, 11 and a half months a year because of the sport that you're playing, which doesn't afford you the opportunity for a business internship or something like that. And that could be perceived as a hole on your resume unless you know how to tell your story about your soft skills that you've gained during this experience and what differentiates you from someone that went and sat in an office and worked on spreadsheets for 6 weeks in New York versus what you learned in real life and practical ambition, responsibility. And so that becomes then the athlete's responsibility to tell that story and build that brand on the resume.
Yeah, and then that's like I guess the perfect segue into pivoting out of sports and entertainment per se. I mean, you're still in sports, but I mean, now talk about what you're doing today, and you can expand upon it, the whole NIL space, and I mean I think a lot of it's going to have to do with branding and sponsoring and all that.
Yeah. So, I was involved in the sports and entertainment company that you mentioned, Sports Studio. We had a successful exit. We sold that business in 21, right at the time of the NIL era beginning. What I saw, Rob, was the same thing I'd seen in Hollywood, and that was adults taking advantage of young people who weren't educated. And given my background and my experience and my passion, I thought I could make a difference in the education space. And so I built a company that tries to teach young people and athletes specifically and how to take advantage of their celebrity. And let's face it, in today's world, if you're a Division III non-revenue athlete, whether it's track and field, tennis, softball, baseball, whatever it is, you still probably were one of the best players on your high school team.
Yes.
There's a good chance you were one of the best players on your travel team. How do you tell that story and how do you use that to meet people, to network, right? We talk about brand, and brand isn't what you think of you, it's what other people think of you, right? And so building a personal brand is important. And then we talk about networking. What are the three circles of networking? And they are your friends and family, which every person in today's generation got a smartphone when they were a teenager. And the first people they connected to on social media were their friends, family, teammates, aunt, uncle, and their parents who were probably watching what they were doing. You should always have a friends and family circle, and the three circles of brand building. The second circle is your community. And I describe that as the people that know who you are, but you don't know who they are. In other words, they followed you in the newspaper, they came to a game, they saw you play, they heard about you. Perhaps they watched you in the neighborhood. And how do you connect with them? That's the second circle. And then the third and final circle of brand building is your professional circle. And at some point, this hopefully will be the largest circle, the biggest circle, because this will be the people that you work with, that you work for, that you hire, that you raise money for. This will be how you get your first, second, and third jobs, will be people that you've met through your networking. And so the three circles of brand building are the foundation of what the Players NIL teaches. And then, of course, it uses social media, digital marketing. We talk about how to talk to brands, whether it be for a job or influencer brands for NIL deal, how to read a contract. We talk about community service and philanthropy as a way to build a brand and give back, and financial literacy, because there are kids that are making, significant money that, if managed properly, could be life-changing, but also could be a disaster, particularly when it comes to paying taxes. So I created the Players NIL to, help change lives and create a better future for everybody that chooses to participate.
And is it online classes, is it in person, or a combination?
It's a combination. So we started out 100% online, what we call asynchronous learning, which is pre-recorded content. And it didn't work, in all candidness. In fairness to, to me, the principles are solid, but the delivery wasn't right. In other words, we're just coming out of COVID in 2022. And, people were tired of online learning. They were tired of Zoom meetings. And they needed actionable insights that they could relate to. In other words, we were teaching classes that were fundamentally important, but they weren't interested in them because they didn't see how it was going to change their life today. And so we've grown into a hybrid model where we have the online access to the programming, but we come in and we create workshops and leadership lessons and continual points of contact to guide them through, with real actionable insights about how to go through all the things we talked about: how to be a young athlete in college, how to get through that, how to network, how to create opportunities, how to build your community circle, your professional circle, how to write an email, how to negotiate a contract. And we really have turned into a life skills company.
And then is it targeted just at college athletes, or now with the way NIL has kind of expanded into the high school space as well?
Yes, great question. We've always envisioned both high school and college, and high school has been a little bit slower to pick up on the NIL world than college. But I believe that high school NIL will be larger than college, because you have 8 million kids playing high school sports and 500,000 in college. And in high school, you have less restrictions right now. You have crazy parents, right? And so, I think NIL is going to be a real big deal in high school. And I'm writing about it this week on my LinkedIn series about what's the cost of doing nothing if you don't educate young people today about the pitfalls and also the opportunities to build a brand and take advantage of your celebrity.
Yeah, and that stuff's great, and I think even you touched on a little bit about the dreaded taxes. I mean, we and I know you and I talked about this offline, but I mean, you hear just stories of just people not understanding it. And like, there's one guy, athlete, that got a deal, like $40,000 deal, spent all the money with his buddies, which again is understandable whether you're an athlete or anybody that age. I mean, if you got all this flow of money coming through, it's certainly easy to spend. But then didn't pay the taxes, and because of that increase, it went towards his family's income and basically bumped him off of his full ride. And I mean, that's just sad. That should not happen. And so it's great to hear, what you're doing, and companies like that, to be in that space and to educate the athletes of, everything that goes along with not only promoting themselves and getting the deals, but then how to manage them.
Yeah. Not just the athletes, Rob, but the parents, the advisors, the coaches, the administrators, everybody in the ecosystem. There's so much unknown, and it's moving fast and changing rapidly. So staying ahead of it and on top of it and understanding what the pitfalls are incredibly important.
Yeah. And then, so basically, so how do people find you and what you're doing in this space?
Well, I'm going to quote a famous football coach from the University of Indiana last year, Kirk Cignetti, and say, Google me. But But the answer is, theplayersnil.com is our website. We're on social. I'm on LinkedIn, Mark Koesterer. The Players NIL is on LinkedIn. So in today's world, if you're interested in what we're doing, just Google us or find us and take a look at what we're offering.
Yeah, that sounds great. And, there's definitely a real need for education out there. So it's great to see. And I encourage people to reach out to Mark. It's so important. And just with everything that's going on, just in this whole NIL landscape. And as I mentioned earlier, it's each week, it's great to get this advice and nuggets. And just, we really want to encourage people to watch and listen to this great content, these different athletes, because it is such an issue. You can find us at alumnidirect.com. The show, Athletes, Entrepreneurs, Alumni Journey, is on our YouTube channel, as well as across all the different podcast networks, Spotify, Apple, and all that. But again, encourage people to get the message across and help others. And Mark, this has been really great. We appreciate it.
Well, Rob, I wish you nothing but success with your business. I think it's a great opportunity for undergraduate athletes to connect with their alums and alums to give back to their school and help. So I wish you luck, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.